Our Favorite Tools for Entrepreneurs podcast will address tools that are useful for startups and existing businesses. We will also cover other aspects of the launch and growth of entrepreneurial ventures. Your two hosts will be Professor Gary Palin and serial entrepreneur Ryan Budden. I am Professor Gary Palin.
Yeah, and I'm Ryan Budden.
This podcast is valuable to entrepreneurs in both launch and growth modes.
That's absolutely right. We'll go over some tools, get you into hyper-growth mode. How can we see some hockey stick growth in your business?
Ryan, one of the major aspects of entrepreneurship is risk. And from my perspective, a lot of people will say entrepreneurs are risk takers. And I disagree with that statement. I think people who jump out of a perfectly good airplane or bungee jump are risk takers. They take risk for the sake of risk and the rush of risk. I've always found entrepreneurs to be risk managers. So they accept risk as a component of their ventures, but they try to minimize it and divert it. So what are your thoughts on that and just overall on risk in entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I think there's two things that are really important. Everybody has their own risk tolerance, and identifying what your risk tolerance is, so where you're comfortable and what type of risks you're comfortable with, is really important if you're going to get into entrepreneurship. So we can kind of get all around that. And the other thing is everybody has a different perspective on risk. So you're right. Some people look at adrenaline sports and think that's insane. And adrenaline sports probably look at entrepreneurship and think it's insane not to know where your next paycheck is coming from. So it's all about the perspective that you bring to it and then the risk tolerance that you're comfortable with inside of that.
Yeah, I had a very successful entrepreneur speaking to one of my classes one time, and a student asked him directly, how do you know when your risk level is too high? And he basically said that, but in a very simple manner. He said whether he sleeps at night or not. He says, so his ability to sleep might be a higher risk tolerance than the person asking the question. But he viewed it as, if you're rolling around at night worrying, you might want to cut back on your risk. And that tolerance to risk is different than different people.
Very much so. My girlfriend and I have pretty much opposite ends of the spectrum of risk tolerance. I'll bet the house every time risk tolerance, and she won't bet the top dollar in the stack. So it makes for some interesting conversations.
Yeah, so you're a go big or go home person.
That's exactly right. Yeah. I've been fortunate enough to have moved around and been put in many situations that I think my comfort with the bottom is high.
So how do you analyze the risk component and from one perspective, personalize it? And you brought an interesting perspective in a relationship, and that's something that you have to be very aware of.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Well, not to directly answer your question, but a great mentor of mine once told me, and I believe this may have been you, that when people are thinking about entrepreneurship and specifically the risk associated with not taking a paycheck, that if you're working for a corporate company, no matter how small or how large, you're not directly responsible for paying yourself. You've just kind of given the assumption to somebody else that paycheck is going to come. So you've taken it off of what you would associate with a risk or what you're worrying about. Where in entrepreneurship, you know exactly when the paycheck is coming, how much it's going to be, if it's going to be more or if it's going to be short, and if there's a runway for that paycheck continuing to come in. So it's again, the perspective. Some people don't like to think about it, to worry about it. And other people really like being able to forecast what it's going to be and how long it's going to happen for.
Yeah, that very likely was maybe. That's something that I've been saying for years. And even as a young person, I always looked at having a job in a large corporation was much riskier than starting a venture of my own, because I controlled it 100% versus someone sitting in some city making a bad decision and I lose my job with no control at all. Whereas I understand that my business venture may not work, but if it messes up, it's my fault.
That's right. And you probably know it's coming. Very little business ventures fail overnight. There are warning signs that it's not going well and that you should be, insecure of your next paycheck. Whereas most people do get fired overnight. they get very little warning that their life is about to change financially.
Yeah, so someone starting out, they really have to analyze what is their tolerance to risk, what they're willing to accept, and embed that in their personal thought process on what types of businesses they're going into, for example. And what we're talking is referred to as founder's risk, which
Right.
there are different types of risk in business. And I think founder's risk is one of the highest levels. Like, for example, product risk is another level.
Sure.
But if you fail on a product, that doesn't mean it's the end of your business.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, one way that I talk about this a lot at the local entrepreneurship center, and a big way my risk portfolio has changed is I'll have hobby businesses that I'm not really focused on making money. But if I'm starting a business that's really I'm relying on, I won't ever start it until I have a pre-sale contract. If you can't go out there and get someone to say, yes, I would buy this under these specific parameters, you shouldn't start a business at my level of risk tolerance now. Whereas the first businesses I started, I had a few really good conversations and just started building something. So I think that has changed quite a lot.
So you go back to my original point is you weren't a risk taker. In that case, you're a risk manager because you're trying to mitigate the risk.
Right.
By having some, say a major company with a letter of commitment would be a way to mitigate that risk.
Yep. And oftentimes I feel like that's a really good conversation to have. What are the parameters? And that lowers risk.
And that goes back to many of the conversations that we've had is to go talk to the marketplace very soon, because the more information that you have from the consumer, actually the lower the risk is.
Yeah, it's amazing how many of these things tie into each other, isn't it?
Oh, it's amazing. And again, you look at like competitor risk is another type of risk that you have to analyze. Sure. Because you don't want to go into a market that's totally saturated with major players that have been established for years. That would be an insane risk.
Yeah, unless you have some sort of magic edge, unless you know for a fact that you're differentiating yourself in some paramount way to that industry.
Yeah, and I use the rule of 7. With the 7 is a very loose number. It's not definitive.
Okay.
But I want my offering to be 7 times faster, or 7 times more efficient, 7 times more effective, 7 times more economical. I don't want just a minor iterative growth. I want a major distinction.
I've never heard that, actually. That's a new one for me. I like it.
Yeah, it's the rule of 7. I probably said it in class. Yeah, you weren't paying attention that day.
This is what I should make a joke about. There was so much wisdom coming out of your mouth, I could only absorb a specific amount of it.
Yeah, we'll go with that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've got some swampland I want to sell to you also. When you talk about the competitive risk, also there's the other side of the coin, and I think this is where people make an error, is when there's no competition.
Yeah, the blue ocean.
Yes. And I'm always hesitant on that, because very often if there's no competition, that might be, or it's a sign there's no market.
Right. Yeah. That is a lot of people come to the Entrepreneurship Center, again, to reference where I spend quite a lot of time, and they have some blue ocean idea. Nobody's done this. This is a whole market that exists and nobody's found before. And I'm very hesitant to jump on board with that, even through a extended conversation, because most likely someone has thought of it. Someone hasn't executed it, is what you're really trying to say. And there's normally a reason behind that.
Yeah, that's a component of risk, a miscalculation of risk that I see all the time, where they think that risk is a good thing, where I would rather go into an oversaturated business than to go into one where there's no proven market. Right.
So what somebody listening to this might be asking, what is a way that they can find out their own risk tolerance? Like what's an exercise, or what's something they can do to get into the feel of entrepreneurship without quitting their day job?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, but I think you touched on it, is to go talk to the marketplace. And if you can get someone to agree, and specifically to give you a signed agreement, letter of intent, those are areas that you can you can look at to how comfortable you are with that. So are you comfortable with one letter of intent, or do you want 10?
Sure. And you can I guess you could run a basic financial model off of each letter of intent, what that could amount to. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's that valley of death at some point where you have to make a leap. And
Sure.
the question is that valley that you're jumping across, how wide is it that you're willing to jump?
Yeah. I always laugh at the analogy of the entrepreneurship's the person that jumps out of the plane and builds the parachute on the way down. And I most of the successful entrepreneurs, sure, there is that leap, as you called it, but they know pretty damn well how to make a parachute if they're willing to jump.
And also, I want to jump out of that airplane ever. But also, if we take that analogy as they're building the parachute on the way down, if it doesn't work, they better find a way to pivot while they're catapulting down to the earth.
Yeah, now you're building a fighter jet instead of a parachute or whatever it is. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's very interesting, but I think it really comes down to you really have to personalize it and assess how comfortable are you with risk. And if you have an extremely low tolerance to risk where it's almost negligible, you might not want to launch a business.
Right. And talking about, once you have that tolerance, it brings, I'm constantly thinking of my girlfriend and I and the relationship there. I would say a big component of that is everybody deals with risk. A lot of people make it seem like they're never stressed about anything. I feel like people just deal with it in different ways. And one of the core components of that is if you are in a relationship or you have a business partner or a wife or, a close friend, a roommate situation, you've got to understand their risk tolerances as well. Because if you're constantly dumping your elevated risk tolerance on somebody else, you're going to stress the bejesus out of them. So having outlets where you can talk to somebody with similar risk tolerance that can sit in it and help identify what to do, I feel like is a really important aspect of risk as well. Accepting you're going to be under a certain risk obligation for the perceivable future.
Yeah, in all honesty, if you don't do that, you probably will have a formal relationship.
Yes, that's right. And obviously I don't take my stressful risk conversations to my girlfriend. I have a support system outside of that.
Yeah, and also we touched on this on a previous podcast. It depends what situation you're in and how much you have to lose.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
So that has to be part of the formula. If you have nothing to lose, well, your risk is fairly low.
That's exactly right. If you're quitting your cushy day job with a wife and kids, you've got quite a lot to lose.
Yeah, it's with no sales.
Exactly right. It's the living in your car analogy.
Yeah, and also too, when you're making decisions up front, you can mitigate risk. Like say, for example, I always advise people that are going into retail, and I always question why they want to go into retail. When I say retail, a storefront retail, is whatever you do, don't sign a long-term lease. Yeah. Because what people don't realize is you have to personally guarantee that. Mm-hmm. And so if you sign a 5-year long-term lease and the business goes down in a year, you've got 4 years, you're liable for that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So those are the types of decisions you want to look at. You can mitigate the risk.
Yeah. Low overhead. And there's lots of businesses with very, very low overhead, especially in today's era of co-working spaces and smaller storefronts. There are ways to pilot a program or pilot a storefront even that are much lower risk in today's society than was maybe previously available.
And the advent of the cloud is a game changer.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can stand up what looks like a legitimate business overnight. Unfortunately, it has made scamming on internet sites pretty commonplace because you can do that. But it means that, legitimate entrepreneurs have that available to them as well.
Well, excellent. Well, a great conversation. I appreciate it, Ryan, and you have a great day.
Yeah, absolutely. Talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to our Favorite Tools for Entrepreneurs podcast with Professor Gary Palin and Ryan Budden. We hope you enjoyed this deep dive into topics that assist with the launch and growth of your entrepreneurial venture. As always, you can head over to ProfSpirit.com to check out more resources and courses designed for you, the entrepreneur. Also, please follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or YouTube to get the most up-to-date information as it is released.